Boo. Look, if you listen to my last video about open theism and Calvinism, do I think what I said refutes Calvinism? No, absolutely not. I know what their answers are with compatibilism and their explanations for how that operates and why their different ideas in the philosophical literature try to give traction to what is required for one to be responsible for their actions. And I know that what I said isn't a refutation of that. You can't refute Calvinism, the concepts, because they're not proving Calvinism. They're trying to make explanations to how personal responsibility could still be validated on their philosophical framework regarding what responsibility is. But the problem is that it goes against our court system and our intuition of blameworthiness and responsibility on an intuitive level. Now, if people are welcome to think that, guidance, control, and not having explicit compulsion or something like that, that's keeping you from doing what you will. If that, that makes it so it's some sort of control that's against your will. Well, why are they? If free will, on one side of your mouth, you argue that having somebody an outside force so that your will is oppressed is enough to make up the difference for what the difference between compulsion and doing what you will is. So in other words, God can determine what you'll do ahead of time so long as you desire to do that thing, and there's no outside force directly opposing that, which would make it unjust. The reason that doesn't work is because simply thinking you're not being oppressed, but you have no ability to do the moral thing, makes you still a victim to not having an ability that is worth talking about. Oh, well, I mean, yeah, you have the physical ability. It's kind of like how it's the same problem with total inability. Oh, yeah, I mean, you can think through the concepts and understand them, and you can choose to follow all the other religions or not, but you have no spiritual discernment to choose what is good. That doesn't make any sense, because people do good things for the right reasons all the time without being regenerated and still rejecting Christianity. It's desperate. So someone said, what was the comment here? Let's see. I guess this is how you escape the evilness of your God. Good going. The answer is, I don't know. I don't know to know. I don't need to know because it makes my God evil, which the Calvinist at least has the balls to consider. Yeah, I reject determinism because it's self-evident. They're welcome. I know a lot of atheists like that. They like to agree with that part of Calvinism because they're determinists, at least in their discourse about talking about philosophy. But when they're operating and their girlfriend cheats on them, they don't think, oh, well, God determined that to be the case. She could have done otherwise. She has the ability in one sense, but not an actual ability. So that makes her responsible, and I can be mad about it. That's total garbage. It's like when the determinists that are, look, once you go into compatibilism, what's the difference between naturalist compatibilism? We can obviously see, you can make a case for naturalistic determinism. I want to know like where the theological determinism meets the naturalistic determinism, especially if God determining evil and good. We obviously see that compatibilism in some sense is like there's cause and effect, nature and nurture. So where exactly does God fit into that if he's determining everything that happens, including the evil? I don't get it. I don't get it. You don't. My point about saying you don't have to know how to explain it isn't that's not a point for determinists. It's not a point. That's not a score for them. I know they'll hear that and they'll think, yeah, he just won't accept the truth. No, that's not it at all. The fact of the matter is, compatibilism is invented to try to get personal responsibility to be true with God determining evil in every action that happens. Well, what do you think that is? That's trying to get God off the hook. So, and it doesn't work. And so everybody realizes the implications of God determining evil, if it seems that way, and seeks to find a way to reduce that obvious implication. And sorry, but compatibilism fails. All I'm saying is, if every argument or possibility of making sense of alternative possibilities or agent causation, if all those arguments fail, then they fail for God. If they fail for God, then he's determined. And if he's determined, I want you to point me to what's... Actually, I don't know, to be honest. Whatever's determining God to do what he does, which is apparently good and evil, I don't think I would want to worship the God that determined Yahweh's nature so that he would, because he's not actually good, because he determines all things, good and evil. So I'm not even sure I would want to worship the God that determined his nature. The point is that it comes down to the intuition of what seems to be the ability to do one or the other. And certainly we all operate as though God has that ability, and then we have a limited version of that if we are not a determinist. And I don't have to explain how that works. Everybody operates as if God is a person. And in that sense, God as a person has the ability to do otherwise. He's not just doing what he has to do because of his nature in that sense. So that's my point. We don't have to explain that for it to be valid. And by the way, it is true that none of the early church writers were determinists. Now, people will appeal to the idea that, oh, well, maybe that's not really true. Well, prove it. Show us the determinist early church writers. Even the Calvinist scholars, the best Calvinist scholars, will tell you that the early church did operate under the idea that man had a libertarian sort of free will. Now, they may not talk about all the ins and outs of the philosophical discourse that we have today, but they were clearly against people who said, they make plenty of comments saying in unison, until Augustine, in unison, they talk about man would be not guilty if he couldn't choose between the good and the evil. So, well, it's not, you can't find every detail about what the issues of philosophical determinism and libertarian free will. You can certainly see that they were not determinists across the board because of responsibility. If you don't think that's true, just like I said, none of the early church fathers believed you couldn't lose your salvation. They all believed you could lose your salvation. Clement is not an example of someone who thought you couldn't lose your salvation. It's easily provable. So, Paul wrote 1 Corinthians 10:13, which is clearly saying alternate possibilities are before us when we're regenerated at minimum. Jeremiah said, thus says the Lord, I didn't even come into my mind. What that doesn't mean, whatever that means, it means something like what it's saying, not the exact opposite. So that I didn't even decree it. It didn't even come into my mind. Look, God didn't decree everything. The Bible plainly states it. I did not command it. I did not decree it. It didn't even come into my mind. Is what that doesn't mean. What it can't mean is that God did decree it. So there's an example of something God didn't decree that falsifies determinism. End of story. If you believe the Bible.